Hello there, I'm Daniel Huffman, and I'm coming to you pre-recorded from south central Wisconsin, on land taken from the Ho-Chunk. And today I want to talk about edges. Over the years at this conference, I've seen many people talk about the cool little techniques that they use to enhance their cartographic designs. Things like glows and blurs and text halos and stuff like that. These are things that I use in my own work, and maybe you do as well, but at the very least, you've probably heard about some of these kind of things. And this is not a talk about how or when to employ any of them. Instead, this is a talk about how, behind the scenes, they're all related to each other. It used to be that I would think about each of these as separate tools, each one to be used in its own situation for its own purpose. But in the last couple of years, I've come to realize how they're connected to each other, and how when I'm doing a blur or a glow or something like that, each time I do that, I'm really getting at the same basic idea, which is the management of edges. So what do I mean by an edge? Well, an edge is just a place where one color transitions into another. The stronger the contrast between the two colors, the stronger the edge. Likewise, the more abrupt the shift, the stronger the edge. I'm sure there are more refined definitions used by people who study visual perception, but I'm just a simple production cartographer, and this works well enough for me. In any case, edges help our brains separate objects from each other and let us perceive their shapes. In fact, I recall reading once that our brains even have special cells that detect edges. So, in this example, the sudden shift in color sets off those edge-detecting cells, and then they allow you to perceive the shape of a circle as a separate object on the page. The shape of the circle is harder to pick up, though, when its color is closer to the background, or it's softly blended with that background color. As I have come to understand, many of the cartographic tricks that I and others regularly use are, in essence, about this, about making edges stronger or weaker. So let's look at an example, glows. Here I have two islands, one with a glow and one without. On the left, the edge between the two shapes is weak because there's not a lot of contrast between the colors, so it's not easy to perceive, though you can probably manage it. On the right, the edge is stronger. Let's zoom in on what's going on here. The glow has darkened the color of the land by a small amount at its edge. This means that the contrast between the land and the water is much greater there than it used to be, and the edge is thus stronger and easier to detect. The glow then fades away quickly, so that most of the land polygon remains the original color. In essence, we've changed the color of the land temporarily, just to give the edge a boost and help our brains tune into the shape. But we can also use glows to make edges weaker, too. Here again, I have two islands. The one on the left doesn't have a glow, but it has a good color contrast, and so you can perceive the edge. On the right, there's a glow, but it's one that's muddied things. By darkening the water along the coastline, I've made the water's color closer to that of the land. Thus, I've weakened the contrast and made the edge harder to see. Understanding all this stuff about edges has been pretty helpful to me. For a long time, I knew that glows could help parts of my map stand out better, but I would apply them rather naively. I would often accidentally make an edge worse, like on the right, because I either put my glow on the wrong side, or I made the polygon darker when I should have made it lighter. Understanding that glows are all about edge enhancement has helped me pick the correct option the first time, though I still mess it up sometimes. Glows are just one example of playing with edges. There are plenty of other little effects that many of us use that are also about edges, and I think we can break them down into two groups, techniques that enhance edges and those that reduce them. So let's just go through the list, starting with edge enhancements. First off, we've got inner and outer glows, which I already talked about, so you probably get the idea. While they are generally used to boost edges, you could also use them to weaken edges, but that's not usually why people use them. Note also that outer and inner glows are really the same thing, but are separated in software like Adobe Illustrator, where the terms just refer to whether the glow effect goes on the outside or the inside of the polygon you're applying it to. Next up, drop shadows. These are actually just glows that are slightly off-center, but it's the same thing. So here I've got an island with a somewhat weak contrast between pale yellow and pale blue. If I add a dark outer glow, now the contrast is better because the yellow is now next to a dark gray that later on fades down into the pale blue. And then if I just shift this glow over a bit, it's now a drop shadow. It works the same way to enhance contrast, But the fact that it's off-center also tricks our brains into perceiving a little 3D effect, but that's a phenomenon to talk about another day. Last on our list of enhancements is halos. Sometimes people put a stroke around their text to help it stand out against a busy background. Notice that the text on the right is easier to read. Here I haven't really enhanced the old edge though, so much as I've replaced it with a new one entirely. On the left, there's a weak edge between the dark green text and the busy green background. On the right, there's now a strong edge between the green text and the white stroke around the text. And then there's another strong-ish edge between the halo and the background. So we've effectively doubled the number of edges and strengthened them, meaning that the shapes of the letters are much easier to pick out. Sometimes people use the term text halo to refer instead to an outer glow or drop shadow effect applied to text rather than a solid stroke. It still works to make text legible by enhancing edges, but it's subtler, and in this example I've actually exaggerated it just a bit to make it easier to see. Using an outer glow instead of a stroke draws less visual attention because there are fewer edges. There's still a strengthened edge between the text and the rest of the map, but now there's no hard edge between the halo and the background. That's been made to gradually fade away. Okay, back to our overview. Those are the enhancements: glows, shadows, which are just glows, and halos, which can sometimes be glows. Next up, techniques that can minimize or reduce edges, because sometimes we want to make edges weaker. But why? Well, let me offer an example. Notice how this text can easily be read when it's against a light or dark gray background, but when that background gets striped, things get a lot more difficult. Those stripes make edges that demand your brain's attention. They act as a form of noise, making it hard for you to pick out the important edges, the ones that define the shape of the words. Sometimes we want to get rid of competing edges that pull attention away from the ones that we want readers to notice. So, one option is to judiciously blur things. By doing so, the stripe edges get weaker and draw less attention, letting us focus better on the harder edges of the text. Another solution is to do a knockout. This simply hides features that are getting in the way. In this example, the red lines vanish when they get close to the black text and dots. So instead of trying to mentally disentangle the edges of the letters from the edges of the red lines, we now only have to distinguish the letters from the light background. There's nothing interfering anymore with our ability to perceive the shapes of the letters. Finally, in our roster of edge reduction techniques, we have feathers. A feather is not often much different than a blur. Instead of giving an object a hard edge, you can let it fade away gradually, on one side or all around the object. Here, I've feathered just one side of a dashed line. This leaves us with a hard edge on one side of the line, but a weak edge on the other. In this particular case, I was using the distinction to subtly indicate to the reader which area was inside of the polygon and which was outside. We can debate whether that worked or not, but you get the idea. And if you've been paying attention, you might notice that this is more or less sort of like a glow, as a glow is just a stroke with one feathered side. So blurs are sort of like feathers, and feathers are sort of like glows. Again, these various techniques, each with their own name, are all aspects of the same central idea. It's all just messing with edges and making them stronger or weaker. And that's really the point of this talk. I just want to put this idea in your brains of a sort of grand, unified theory of edges, we could call it. And again, none of the techniques that I've talked about are particularly new or exciting. They're probably already in your toolkit, or at least are not unfamiliar to you. But I think there's a value in not only understanding that a technique can make our work better, but really digging in and thinking about how and why it does so. And I didn't really think much about that until a couple of years ago with regards to these tools. And now that I've started organizing them in my mind in this way, it's been really valuable to me in employing them a little bit more thoughtfully and intelligently. Plus, it's just kind of neat to think about, so that's why I wanted to share it with you. And maybe you'll draw some value from it, or maybe you were already thinking about things in this way. But in any case, that's what I've got for you today. So thanks so much for listening to me, and I hope to catch you all in person next time.